Okay, so I want to go over the research paper proposal assignment a little bit in detail so that hopefully I can answer some of your questions before they're asked. Okay, so the purpose of the assignment is to make you proficient in the art of crafting an effective research proposal. So this is an important thing because anytime you're going to present at a conference, if you want to apply to grad school, or even if you just want to do research, the first step is a proposal. So that's why I'm forcing you to do it. So the proposal informs the reader of the content and scope of your planned research. So it should include the following sections. So it's going to be a formalized paper. And though there's formatting in ASA, you do not need a title page. You do not need an abstract. You do not need to go that far into detail. I'm looking more at like the content of the words you're using to describe research more so than a title page and all that other crap. Okay, so you start at the introduction. You want to give us an idea of what the paper is going to be about, right? Just like with any introduction, you want to preview the kind of main points you're going to make in the paper. And you want to, at the end of it, state what your research question is explicitly, right? Like, so for the purpose of this research, I want to examine whether or not, blank has an effect on blank or something of that nature. So while you're writing, though, you need to keep in mind why the reader should care about the issue, because that's going to make the paper a lot more persuasive, right? If you explain the sociological relevance or importance of, even this could be just a sentence of, this topic is important to study because of blank, right? So let's say you're talking about homelessness and you want to see, how does being a member of the LGBTQ community affect homelessness, right? So you would say, I want to see whether or not, this population is more likely to end up homeless. So that would be your research question, right? And you would kind of want to set up any of the other factors that are related to homelessness that you might be talking about. Maybe substance abuse issues, maybe being a veteran, maybe any of these kind of other things, right? But you want to set up the main points of what you're going to be talking about in your paper. So sometimes what I suggest is when you're actually writing and drafting this, because hint, you should be drafting it, like don't just write it once and turn it in because that's going to be crap. You want to draft something so that you have time to kind of edit it and refine it a little bit. So typically what I do is I'll just make like a little blurb about the basic intro, and then I come back at the end once I'm like done with the rest of the paper and finish the intro and conclusion together, because they're kind of like the bookends of the same points, right? You want to start by setting up, here's what I'm going to be talking about, and then conclusion you want to end with, here's what I have been talking about. And what's different about the sections is the intro, you're setting up your research question, right? You're not just assuming you know the topic, right? Because that would be somewhat arrogant. But anyway, it wouldn't be a research proposal if you're like, I already know there's a problem. You're like, cool, okay. You need to demonstrate that there is through other people's research, hence the lit review is kind of like the main part of this paper. So the lit review section should have at least 5 sources relevant to your research topic. So think of it as its own lit review, but it's kind of like a mini lit review for a research proposal, right? So these are the theories, concepts, and researchers that give the context to the previous research done about your topic. So do not make this an annotated bibliography. That will piss me off. I hate annotated bibliographies. Don't give me everything about the source. Please, 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 if you take anything away from this audio, it's explain to me how the research is relevant to your paper in like a sentence or two. Do not say, oh, these researchers at the university of this had a title of their article. If you include the title of the article at all, that's a problem, right? If you're using a bunch of quotes, that's a problem. Just explain what they said, right? Research found that there is a relationship between being in the LGBTQ community and homelessness. And then you slap the citation on the end of the sentence. Like that's the kind of direct paper you want to write. Because that's going to make it shorter for you. That's going to make it easier for you and easier for me as the reader to understand what it is you're trying to argue. So you have to make it clear that you understand what the research articles are saying and you're synthesizing them into your own voice. This is why I'm going to put up a sample or two of proposals from the past to give you an idea of other students that have gotten A's. Though, hint, I want to be as clear as possible, those proposals are not perfect. They are student submissions, so they will have some errors and you shouldn't use them as the guide for what your paper should be like. You should use this assignment sheet or this audio lecture of the assignment, right? Use my guidelines. They might have messed that up. They might have used ASA improperly. They might have not properly worked the research question into the paragraph. I have not gone back and edited those papers to make them somehow perfect, because no paper submission is perfect, right? It's a draft. So in that regard, I'm going to give you some ideas of previous people's research, but what I want you to look at when you're looking at those samples is look at the way that they introduce the researcher's topics, the researcher's ideas, but they lead with their own voice, meaning it's clear and explanatory from the writer's point of view, right? That's really the most important thing about a lit review. You want to explain what research has looked at this topic before to give the context for what you're doing, but you also want to make sure that you're leading it with your voice. You're not just like, according to so-and-so at this university, and here's the name of the article, and here's the 10 people that did the research, and they interviewed 217 people, and blah, blah. Keep in mind that if you're reading through your own paragraph you've written and none of that is directly relevant to what you're saying, like the number of research participants, the kind of method that they used, the university where they did the research, if none of that is directly relevant to what you're saying, then get rid of it. Get rid of all of that information. Just tell us, oh, 27% of people thought that blah, blah, blah. Like, that's all we need to know, right? So be succinct and clear, and this paper kind of writes itself. It's very clear, right? Also, depending on the kind of topic you're looking at, you might want to break down the lit review into subcategories. This helps you group the concepts instead of, you should not be doing like one article, one paragraph, the next paragraph is another article, the next paragraph is another article. You need to weave research together for your own aims, not just simply summarize dryly what someone else said. Does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. I can't see if you're nodding or not because this is an audio recording. So anyway, hopefully this does make sense, but typically, I gave an example here. So if you're looking at causes of poverty, you could put similar research into the categories. So instead of, this one, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, Article 5, you group them by the relationship they have to that particular subcategory, right? So if you're looking at social structure, how social structure affects poverty, how social class affects poverty, how gender, how race, those things, then you can organize the articles that are about race and poverty together and the ones about gender and poverty together. This really helps you make a kind of clear outline for what your paper will be. And then you just kind of fill in the stuff that's applicable to that, which just makes it so much easier to write and much easier to read. So, that's really going to help you organize your arguments effectively. And, this is kind of my reminder. This is a basic lit review. So it's not supposed to be exhaustive. You're not supposed to show me every single topic that's been related to this, because of course you can't, right? Not in the space provided, not with so few citations that you need. You only need 5, right? So what you want to do though is you're going to have, even in your lit review section, you need an introduction to the lit review. So just like with the general introduction, the intro to the lit review, you're going to set up, like, let's say you have, you were looking at LGBTQ, individuals in homelessness, and you were looking at youth and adults or something like that. Then you would say, oh, I'm going to look at these 2 different groups and how homelessness affects them differently. LGBTQ youth, LGBTQ adults, like what leads them to homelessness. So that way you could look at how maybe different factors affect different age groups, such as a lot of LGBTQ youth are not accepted by their families, so they often, or they're facing abuse or, of some kind at home, so they leave and end up on the street, right? Versus some adults, it's more of a substance abuse issue or having trouble with housing and these kind of other things. So, basically you want to organize these things around subtopics so that it makes more sense top to bottom. And really you want a little intro, like even just like a sentence or 2 to the lit review to say, here's the things I'm going to be talking about, and set it up for the reader, right? You want transitions between your subheadings. So let's say you were looking at how gender affects a particular topic, and then you're going to look at race as well. Then you would want some transitory sentence at the end saying, gender is a large factor in how this is understood, but race is also another factor. And then go into the race section. So don't take it for granted that because you understand what you're saying, that the reader will understand it as well. So when I'm reading this from a grading perspective, I want to see that you can clearly demonstrate your arguments in your voice, not by using a bunch of quotes, not by putting in a bunch of ancillary information that isn't relevant at all, right? That you're being clear and effective about your argument. And then at the very end of your lit review section, you're going to want to have a clear statement of your hypothesis, right? Okay, so I put basic method section, but everyone does this weird where they'll literally write that as the subheading. That is totally not what it's supposed to be. The hint was it's just not supposed to be like a fully fleshed out method section. This is like this is a paragraph, right? This is not hard right here. So this is the kind of, where you're proposing what research you would do to study your phenomenon. Of course, this is just proposed, right? You don't have the time and resources actually to do the research, though hint, you are going to construct a survey and you are going to distribute and analyze that survey. Though let's say in this proposal you say, I'm going to interview 30 people. You don't actually have to interview 30 people. You just have to find a methodology that connects to what your research question is. So let's say if your research question is asking something, how do you answer that question? Right? Not just by looking at other people's research. People say, oh, I'll look at statistics or I'll look at this. Okay, what does that mean? Right? How are you going to generate your own research on the topic? And it's going to be specific to what your research question is. So if your research question is asking something about trends or habits or likelihoods of things, then it kind of makes sense to go maybe more quantitative. Though there's no necessarily right or wrong. It's just in the method section, you're going to have to explain why you picked the one you did. So there's not really a right or wrong with this, but let's say it's something asking, what factors affect LGBTQ youth being homeless or something like that. So you could say, I'm going to distribute a survey that looks at this, or I'm going to, look at, different government records that keep statistics of, people that seek, treatment for drug use, or people that, use shelter systems or whatever it is, right? You're basically going to lay out what data either previously exists or you are going to collect in order to answer this question, right? And you don't have to answer it like in every aspect. You're just going to answer part of it, meaning you're picking typically a qualitative or a quantitative approach. Though if you really want to do a mixed methods, that's fine. Just remember, the more stuff you say you're going to do, the more you have to explain and justify it. So I'm just trying to keep it easy for you guys to say like, oh, I'm going to ask what factors are related to this. So I'm going to do a survey, and hint, you're actually going to do a survey. So that kind of makes sense. So, but let's say your question is asking something like, what are the experiences of people, or why do they do what they do, right? Then that might be more of a qualitative approach, where maybe you'd say you're going to interview people, you'll do a focus group, you're going to do an ethnography, whatever it is, right? The whole point is you just have to explain like what you think you would do and why that would fit, right? So like, let's say you're looking at a population of people that are marginal and have very little known about them. You'd say, well, I'm going to do an ethnography because this is a good way to provide information and insight into groups that are more marginalized, right? Or by spending so much time in a research location, because ethnographies take a long time, you'll have a great understanding of this particular group that there's a deficit of research on, or something like that, right? Again, it's hard for me to say this is exactly how it works because it's very specific to what your question is. So you have to think, what is my question asking? Is it a micro question, level question? Is it a macro level question? And how could I possibly answer this? And remember, there's like not really a wrong answer to that. You just have to justify it. So like, let's say we were all like, if I was one of those terrible, terrible professors that they literally make you all research the same topic so it's easier for them, which for me, I realized that would be like soul crushing and boring for a lot of you. So it'd be boring for me to read too. But anyway, so I don't do that. But sometimes they'll say, you have to research, let's say, I don't know, some new policy or maybe immigration reform or something like that, right? Like let's say we all picked immigration as our topic. We could all approach that, even if we were looking at a very similar research questions, from multiple different methodologies. So even if the entire class was looking at the same topic, there's still the possibility of everyone having a different approach, even if they were looking at surveys, the kind of survey they were going to do. Is it going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be computer generated, right? You don't really have to get super detailed in this. You just have to give me a paragraph, right? And again, you just have to justify why this method is appropriate to your research and how it can provide the information that you need to answer your question, right? Any limitations should be mentioned clearly, but again, a sentence saying that, a quantitative approach has a limitation of, not getting at respondents' experiences or, those beliefs or things like that, or something, like maybe a qualitative limitation is that it's not generalizable often to a larger population, right? You might be able to add to the existing theory, but not necessarily to say, okay, this represents X amount of people. So anyway, you go through that stuff. That's like a solid paragraph there. And then, let's see, citations. So since you have to have 5 peer-reviewed cited sources, you have to have a reference page. And this should be its own separate page at the end. Like, let's say you end and your last page is like a paragraph. You still have to go to the next page to start the reference page. People always mess that up. And I don't want you to lose points for stupid stuff. So I put a link here for how to do the ASA formatting and citations. But please remember, again, you do not need to do the manuscript formatting. No manuscript formatting. You do not need a title page. You do not need an abstract. You do not need any of that crap. It's just a waste of time. So it's not really necessary for the purpose of this class, so don't even worry about it, right? You're just going to worry about your in-text citations and the subheading format, that kind of crap. As far as the IRB requirements, you have to go to their website and make your own informed consent document. They have a template, right? Basically, you just download the template, you change a couple of the words, you're good to go, right? But the idea for this is to make you have to go through the kind of, checklist of what people have to do in order to do their actual research. Because hint, it is a methods class, you should learn how to do that stuff. But what you're going to do is you're going to download their consent form. I got the link here, but again, type that in or just go to IRB, just even put in like Kelsey Fullerton IRB and it'll pop up. And you're going to modify it. And I'm not really going to mark you down that much because there's not a lot of information I'm giving. And the book kind of goes over consent forms, but not much. So this is really just kind of a formality for you to go through. You attach this to the end of your paper so that I can just kind of look through it. I'm not going to be super punitive about grading it, but I just want to really make sure that you understand the kind of process that people have to go through in order to do the research, right? I'm not going to make you submit your stuff to IRB. That would be a huge pain in the ass. In the past, they used to have all these quizzes you had to take in order to gain access to IRB, and I'm not going to make you do that either. So just download the template, change it up a little bit, because remember, informed consent is basically a huge hallmark of human participant research. You have to make sure you're telling people if there's any potential harm or risk, or even benefits, and let people know ahead of time. And then, informed consent just means that if at any time they decide to leave the research, they're welcome to do so. And you need to communicate this to anyone that's in your research study. So that's kind of like a big part of research. Okay, so as far as the specific formatting requirements, remember you need to have 5 citations, peer-reviewed citations, not some, random dude on YouTube or whatever. No Wikipedia or I'll lose it. So don't do that. It should be 12-point font. And I'm looking for double spaced here. Double spaced. So I'm looking between 4 to 10 pages in length. Double spaced. So that's really pretty short, right? You're aiming for about a 5-page paper, single spaced, right? At the most. So I'm thinking like 4 to 5 pages is where the average one is going to be. Remember, you just need a kind of a healthy paragraph or so for your intro, like to set up what the topic is and set up what your question is. You're going to need a couple paragraphs for your lit review just to say, this is the previous research and here's what justifies the kind of research I'm going to do. And then you set up your hypothesis at the end, and then you're going to have this method section that's just going to give me like one paragraph of what proposed research you would do and a brief conclusion to the whole paper that just says, this is the kind of research that you want to do. And again, just wraps up the main points of what you're trying to say from your introduction to your conclusion, right? And remember, with the length, like let's say your paper is a little short or it's a little long, I don't care. I teach writing, and something that's been broken into me over various years of teaching it is that people write differently. There is no set standard for writing, nor should there be, right? You should find your writing style. So as a result, I'm not super strict about page length. I know some professors go crazy with it, like literally tell you the specific word count, which is weird. But for me, I don't want people that So people write differently because they speak differently, right? Like, as you can tell, I go on and on and on, so do my papers. Some people are much more direct and succinct, so as a result, they might be right at the low end of those papers. I'm not going to grade you down for having a shorter paper or a little bit longer paper. I'm looking at the content. If the content is there, if the information is there, that's what I care about, right? So the IRB part where you just download the thing and make your own consent form, kind of easy peasy, that's 10 points of it. And the proposal itself is worth 40 points. So that's 50 points, right? That's a pretty hefty part of the class, considering your midterm and final are only 50 points each. So this is kind of like its own exam. So again, it's not super, extensive as a paper. You're looking at 4 to 5 pages, but they should be clear pages. This is not something you want to write in one draft, right? You want to outline this and have an idea of like, okay, here's the 3 factors I'm going to look at, my subtopics. You're going to find a couple research articles from the library, and then you're going to kind of gently weave that stuff in, right? It does not need to be a full demonstration. And some people have a hard time with this because let's say you're looking at a topic that's kind of broad and you're saying, you understand that there's a lot of factors. So again, going back to the homelessness example, like there's a lot of factors related to homelessness, right? So you could say, you are aware that substance abuse, being a veteran, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like all of these things are associated with homelessness. But then you just say something like, for the purpose of this paper, I'm going to examine these 2 particular things or just this one particular thing, so that you can then, kind of have a more narrow focus that's going to help you be clearer and more succinct, more direct, and kind of just get your paper done, right? Because you don't have much time. If you are just going to sit down and try and do it top to bottom, that's not a good way to write a paper. You're literally fighting against the way that your brain works. It can only be creative or analytical at once, which is why people get writer's block when they try and write the perfect sentence top to bottom, because you can't. You're literally working against your own brain. The best way to write a paper is in like 20-minute chunks. You sit down for 20 minutes, make the outline. Then the next day, you sit down for 20 minutes, you fill it in a little bit. You do your first draft, or maybe kind of like give your basic intro. Then, the next day you sit down for 20 minutes and you start working on one of your sources for your paper. You just kind of go through in little chunks, because then the way it works is your subconscious brain is still working on it while you're not writing the paper. And so each time you come back to the paper, even if it's just a, kind of a real drafty draft, you have better eyes to see it again, right? You've had more time to kind of reflect on it in, the back of your brain, that then when you look at it again, you're going to see the things that you didn't have, you didn't see otherwise. Plus, I highly recommend, because you don't want to get marked down for stupid grammatical stuff, like use Word, use the spell check, use the grammar feature. Make sure that you are able to, clearly demonstrate what you're saying. So you want to read it back to yourself a couple times before you turn it in. And oftentimes the best way to do this is to read it out loud, because by reading it out loud, you're going to hear the problems that are grammatical. Because often our eye, like the brain is so strong that the eye can read right past a sentence that has an error and not see the error, because it just kind of corrects it from the eyeball to the brain. So sometimes when you read it out loud, you hear the things that you're stumbling over that I'm going to see and grade you down for. So, I really highly recommend. There's also resources through the school as far as, people that are writing tutors, the University Learning Center, all those kind of things. Use it, right? Through the library resources, you can use a lot of these online kind of tools. Do it because it's really going to help your paper, and you want to get as many points as you possibly can. So hopefully this has been helpful, and yeah.